Welcome everyone to Yissilmissil Productions channel. My name is Steven Yissel. Today we are doing part 8 of our deep dive series into the Chicago film industry. And before we get started, I do have a slideshow to present to everyone while we read, and we also have a 5-minute film of Essanay from 1909, so we will do that. So I'm going to be right here, this tiny screen here. But we will be reading from chapter 8 today. And we're going to have a little music in the background too while we're at it. Alright? So just let me know if the music is too loud. I will switch it up. I'll switch it up. I'll switch it around. But yes, today we are covering Chapter 8. The Golden Age of Essanay from Flickering Empire. How Chicago Invented the U.S. film industry. And this is by Michael Glover Smith and Adam Selzer. So I hope you're all doing well, and be sure to hit the like and subscribe, and if you are subscribed, please make sure that you can hit the notification bell, and that'll help move things along. Super chats are also open, so any of that is very much appreciated. So let's get started, shall we? Chapter 8. The Golden Age of Essanay. Following its first big success with An Awful Skate in July 1907, Essanay Studios produced more than a dozen additional shorts before the end of that year. Of these films, all of which are now lost. The catalog descriptions and the titles themselves, like Mr. Inquisitive, Where Is My Hair, and The Dancing Nig, suggest that most were comedies that were directed by Gilbert M. Anderson. And I believe the short that we have to present today is also by George. And that one is titled The Haunted Lounge, and it's from 1909 under Essanay Studios. So we'll be getting to that at the end of this chapter, once I'm done reading. The exceptions were the matter-of-factly named documentary The Unveiling Ceremonies of the McKinley Memorial, Canton, Ohio, September 30th, 1907, which was released less than 2 weeks after it was shot, and which was also likely the only Essanay film of its time made outside of the city of Chicago. And the penultimate Essanay production of the year, the poignant drama A Christmas Adoption, which was released on December 20th. Releasing Christmas-themed films shortly before the holidays would soon become an Essanay tradition. For 1908, Essanay impressively managed to manufacture and release no less than 72 films. The production values of these movies increased drastically from the 1907 shorts. Nearly all of them were shot in Essanay's new studio facilities in Chicago's uptown neighborhood. And I believe we looked at a few of those present-day photographs on Google Maps a few parts ago in this series, so you can go check that out over there. No longer a two-man operation, Spoor and Anderson brought more diverse and ambitious subject matter before Essanay cameras after naming Henry McRae Webster as head of production and hiring new writers, directors, and technicians along with actors. This new initiative included the making of prestigious, quote, period piece, end quote, films because the uptown studio space allowed for the creation of elaborate sets and costumes. Several of these 1908 productions would become landmarks, such as The James Boys in Missouri, the first movie about the famous outlaw brothers, was released in April to much controversy. The Life of Abraham Lincoln, released in October, was likely the first biopic of a U.S. president, and the December release of A Christmas Carol would be the very first of countless American film adaptations of Charles Dickens' timeless novella. For this film, Essanay imported an authentic English stage actor, Tom Ricketts, to play the iconic role of Ebenezer Scrooge. The most significant extant Essanay movie following An Awful Skate, however, is probably the 1909 production of Mr. Flip, directed by Anderson. Mr. Flip is an important and influential slapstick comedy. It is the earliest such film included in Kino Video's 2002 Slapstick Encyclopedia DVD boxed set, and also a good showcase for the comedic acting of Ben Turpin, who had come a long way as a performer since his motion picture debut in An Awful Skate less than 2 years earlier. Turpin plays the title character as a lascivious he's a last child. Repeatedly pops up in various establishments to sexually harass the female employees. In each instance, the women turn the tables on Mr. Flip by inflicting physical pain on him and or humiliating him, causing him to flee the premises. The film is similar to An Awful Skate in that almost every scene features a gag that plays out in a single unedited shot before cutting to a new location and also a new camera setup. The difference is that Mr. Flip in each location features an elaborate, impressively designed set. Mr. Flip is shown attempting to caress or kiss the cheeks of various women in order: a store clerk, a manicurist, a telephone operator, a barber, a bartender, and a waitress, in each of their places of work. In succession, he finds himself unceremoniously escorted out of the store on a dolly cart, stabbed in the rear with a pair of scissors, shocked with electricity, smothered with shaving cream, sprayed with seltzer water, and attacked with a pie. Aside from the intriguing way the plot opens itself up to a feminist reading, not only because the female victims flip the script on their harasser, but also because the ensemble cast of women portrayed as working diverse jobs 11 years before they had the right to vote. This movie is probably the most noteworthy today for its final scene in which a woman working behind the counter of a diner responds to Mr. Flip's advances by smashing a pie in his face. The scene is believed to be the first time the famous pie in the face gag was depicted in a film comedy. That's a very significant piece of history there. In 1909, the language of cinema had not yet evolved to the point where directors were routinely cutting to close-ups of actors' faces during the emotional high points of a scene. D.W. Griffith's innovative use of extensive close-ups in The Lonedale Operator was still 2 years away. The one close-up in Mr. Flip is an insert shot of a woman sticking a tiny pair of scissors through the bottom of a wicker chair, a detail that would have gone unnoticed in the longer shots that otherwise characterize the movie. Still, in spite of the dearth of close-ups, which makes impossible to clearly see Ben Turpin's famously crossed eyes, the comedian's performance nonetheless manages to be effective. Though the movie is lighthearted, Mr. Flip's nervous, jittery energy and his inability to keep his hands off the female characters make him truly annoying and thus fully deserving of the comeuppance he receives at the end of every scene. Interestingly, Mr. Flip's costume contains elements that would become part of the iconic looks of future screen comedians. His thick, obviously fake mustache predates Groucho Marx's famous grease paint mustache by many years, though both mustaches can be said to have a common root in vaudeville. And his flat-topped straw hat is uncannily similar to the one that would become forever identified with Buster Keaton in the 1920s. In spite of the success of films like Mr. Flip, however, the still new motion picture medium was neither lucrative nor respectable circa 1909, especially in comparison to a prestigious, ages-old art form such as live theater. Anyone who worked for Essanay in the early years, in front or behind the camera, would have to perform multiple jobs for the company. Ben Turpin, for instance, may have graduated from janitor to leading man and become Essanay's first star in the process, but he still had to do double duty as the company's props manager in order to make ends meet. George Spohr would later tell a story about spying on Turpin as he took a bouquet of flowers from a film set at the end of the day shoot and stole out with it across the back lot of the Argyle Street studio. Initially suspicious of the comedian/property manager's behavior, Spohr became deeply moved as he witnessed Turpin crawl beneath the barbed wire fence of the cemetery adjacent to the studio and place the flowers on a grave. Spohr confronted the comedian at the back door of the studio. Quote, "Ben, I just saw you do a beautiful thing, a thing that moved me more than I can say. From now on, whenever we have any flowers left over from the scenes, I want you to put them on a grave." Unquote. Quote, "Gee, boss," unquote, Turpin allegedly replied. Quote, "That's where I got him from," end quote. So that's just, I think, speculation on what the conversation would have been like. In June 1909, less than a month after the release of Mr. Flip, Moving Picture World declared Essanay to be the, quote, "house of comedy hits," end quote. In spite of his success with comedy, however, Gilbert Anderson, as both director and actor, would soon shift his attentions to the Western genre almost exclusively. Anderson's first Essanay Western, The James Boys in Missouri, shot in Chicago and Scottsdale, Michigan, created a firestorm of controversy for being sympathetic to the title Outlaws, and thus inaugurating a debate that still rages to this day about whether or not movies glorify the exploits of criminals. Well, I'd say they do. It received mostly positive critical notices and was a big box office success for Essanay in 1908, while simultaneously it was also banned in several U.S. cities, including, ironically, Chicago. The experience of making the James Boys in Missouri whetted Anderson's appetite for making more westerns, however, which he began shooting on location regularly throughout the southwestern United States, such as Texas, Colorado, and California, in late 1909 and into 1910. During one such trip, Anderson created his, quote, Bronco Billy, end quote, persona, a cowboy character he would embody as an actor in literally hundreds of films over the next several years. Although Anderson had long advanced the importance of location shooting for westerns, including during his short stint for Selig Polyscope a few years earlier, his very first Bronco Billy movie, 1910's Bronco Billy's Redemption, was still partially shot in Chicago, with additional location work being done in El Paso, Texas. Hey Jason, I see you there in the chat. Good to have you here. It has been estimated that an astonishing 21% of American films in 1910 were westerns. Essanay, like Selig Polyscope, was therefore justifiably proud of the authenticity of its, quote, horse operas, end quote, especially in an era when shooting on location in the Southwest meant transporting cast, crew, and equipment over great distances in order to obtain convincing results. Westerns shot in locations as far away as New Jersey or Paris were increasingly attacked by film critics of the time for their inauthentic scenery. The Essanay Guide, the studio's official bi-monthly publication, used vivid language to extol the virtues of the cinematography of its ace lensman Jesse Robbins. Quote, everyone familiar with the Essanay Company's splendid Western films has noted the clear, almost stereoscopic photography, which makes the figures apparently stand out from the screen in such a splendid perspective that it is hard to realize that one is not actually looking upon the scene of the picture itself. This is due chiefly to the absolute purity of the atmosphere, which seems to carry not a particle of dust, smoke, or hazy fog. Clearly outlined to every minute detail, objects several miles distant can be photographed with all the clearness and correctness as when seen with the naked eye, end quote. Although Essanay's Anderson-led Western Company was successful in 1910, George Spore's home office unexpectedly ran into trouble when a new independently owned rival studio, the American Film Manufacturing Company, set up shop in Chicago in the fall of that year. American Manufacturing, also known as Flying A Studios, was based in Chicago for only a brief while. Like everyone else, they soon relocated to Southern California. And we'll find out why very soon. But in that short span of time, they nonetheless managed to lure away a lot of Essanay's top talent by offering higher salaries. Among the defectors were Essanay's most important leading man, J. Warren Kerrigan, and screenwriter Alan Dwan, D-W-A-N, who had started off his Essanay career as an electrician, but had since worked his way up to become the head of their scenario department. Essanay rebounded by hiring a whole new roster of talent, such as screenwriter Luella Parsons, who soon replaced Dwan, director Theodore Wharton, W-H-A-R-T-O-N, and prototypical movie stars such as Beverly Bain and Francis X. Bushman, Ruth Stonehouse, Henry B. Walthall, who would be the future star of W.D. Griffith's Birth of a Nation, and Bryant Washburn. Rather than crumple, Essanay responded to this new challenge by rebuilding itself and rising to even greater heights. In this era, many of Essanay's actors were initially given bit parts. Then, only after they had gradually proven themselves, they were allowed to play the more substantial roles, becoming part of Essanay's, quote, first company, end quote, that led to stardom. Once popular, a star persona would coalesce in the public imagination, helped along by Essanay's public relations and advertising departments, and the actor would then typically play similar roles in many similar kinds of films. Most of these actors appeared in dozens or even hundreds of Essanay films in the second decade of the 20th century. A typical success story was that Ruth Stonehouse, a former dancer who began her career at Essanay as an extra and eventually became one of the company's most prominent leading ladies. As she told Photoplay magazine, quote, "So one day I went over to the Essanay studio and asked for work. I got it, but only bits. I didn't seem to get ahead, and I began to feel that I was a failure. One day I was standing watching a scene. I was heartsick and discouraged, and really on the brink of giving up. Suddenly the girl playing the lead was taken ill and had to leave. The director looked frantically around. He saw me. It was the beginning of the picture, and he was behind in his work, so he popped me into the picture. It was one of these weepy stories, and I guess the director thought I was the most forlorn thing he had ever seen. I was supposed to be emote, and I did. I emoted enough for 7 Sarah Bernhardts. I cried all over the place and became the official sob sister of the studio. I died in every way there was to die, I think, and had more children dead and alive than any woman that ever lived. Niobe was dry-eyed, marble-hearted dame compared to me. So one day I wrote a comedy for myself. It was accepted, work over a bit, and that's where I escaped the thrall of tears." End quote. More atypical was the story of Francis X. Bushman, who had a much quicker route to Essanay movie stardom. Bushman was a bodybuilder turned theatrical actor from the East who Essanay had put under contract in early 1911. According to his biographers Lon and Deborah Davis, Bushman made his first appearance in an Essanay film within an hour of his first arrival in Chicago. Bushman was approaching Essanay Studios to report for work when he saw a large group of people filming a scene in front of a house across the street. Bushman noticed that one of his old stage directors, Richard Foster, Daddy Baker, was directing the movie. Baker beckoned over his former protege, insisting that he appear in the scene. Baker wanted to be able to say that he, quote, was the first, end quote, to put Bushman before a motion picture camera. Baker's instinct about Bushman proved correct. Tall, muscular, and strikingly handsome, especially when seen in profile, the young actor would soon be Essanay's top draw, easily eclipsing the popularity of J. Warren Kerrigan. Bushman's, quote, classic profile and wavy locks literally drove the girls into a frenzy, end quote, Luella Parsons later recalled. Although Bushman rarely had anything good to say in hindsight about his experience at Essanay, often claiming that he could not remember the movies he made there, it was Essanay that first propelled the actor to superstardom, which led to more lucrative contracts with Metro and Vitagraph, and eventually a prominent role in the epic 1925 version of Ben-Hur, the most expensive movie of the entire silent film era. Bushman's animosity towards Essanay apparently stemmed from what he believed were the company's slipshod production methods, although it is also possible that the theatrically trained actor's education and the differences between stage acting and film acting came as a series of rude shocks that left a permanent bad taste in his mouth. So I'd like to just comment on this. I think Bushman just distanced himself and didn't want to associate with Essanay, so he just claimed that he forgot he made any movies there, even though he was like their top draw there. Hey Zen, I see you in the chat. And Jason, yes, Essanay is still around today. Bushman later recalled that while he was chatting with George Spohr in the Essanay offices on his first day of work, Henry McRae Webster, who had been assigned to direct the actor's first movie, arrived and immediately began barking orders. Quote, "Be on the floor ready to work at 9 sharp tomorrow morning," unquote. McRae told Bushman, quote, "You'll play an artist who falls in love with his model. Here, I'll jot down the address of a costume house, and you ride downtown and get yourself a velvet coat and beret," unquote. You know, I mean, that's just how directors talk. So if this actor was getting all bent out of shape over taking direction, then he shouldn't be an actor. But he was a bodybuilder, and he also had theater background. So it says he had a hard time transitioning to film anyways, so he probably didn't like the bossiness of a film director. But he ended up making money, didn't he? Bushman found the experience of being on a film set appalling. Quote, "Just imagine a madhouse with all the inmates turned loose. Add to that a boiler factory going full swing, plus a temperature of at least 120 degrees from the blinding lights. Well, my God, I was accustomed to the courtesy and quiet of the theater. I'd never seen or heard anything like it," unquote. Bushman was also offended by Webster's direction, which he later remembered as occasionally being yelled from off camera while scenes were being shot. Quote, "I gritted my teeth and swore I'd remember what to do in the next scene," end quote, the actor recalled. Quote, "But then, in the middle of everything, Webster starts improvising ideas and screams them at me. He screamed until his voice gave out, and then stamped on the floor and hurled his megaphone," end quote. Alright, so you gotta think these... Okay, I want to say like the 120 degrees being inside a film studio with those lights would be really taxing on anybody. But then you have this director that's shouting direction instead of being personable, and that's probably what Bushman didn't like. But this was a different time. They were just starting to put all this stuff together, and they were making longer format films. So being chaotic on set, I think, was just a part of the trade until they figured out better ways to do things. Bushman later claimed to have been so horrified upon viewing his first one-reeler, His Friend's Wife, that's the title of it, that he offered Spohr money to burn the negative. And you see, this, I think, is how we lost a lot of these films. We got one account here of an actor offering to pay to burn all the copies of a particular film. Imagine how many other instances there are of that. We got a footnote here. These improvisational directorial methods, however, were not unique to Webster, E. Mason, Lightning Hopper, I'm sorry. Let me reread that. These improvisational directorial methods, however, were not unique to Webster. E. Mason Lightning Hopper was a comedy director at Essanay who earned his nickname in his vaudeville days when he would create comedy sketches from scratch right in front of a live audience. Also nicknamed the Nebraska Cyclone, Hopper would scream himself hoarse, trying to get people to be funny, hollering, quote, "Kick him! Sit on his head!" unquote, as a group of extras piled on top of a star. Yeah, you see, you don't want to mistreat your actors like that, because you can really lose them fast if you're abusing them like that. Bushman later claimed to have been so horrified upon viewing his first one-reeler, His Friend's Wife, that he offered Spohr money to burn the negative. Spohr's incredulous reply was allegedly, quote, "Burn it? Why, that's the best picture Essanay has ever made," end quote. So Spur was just absolutely shocked by Bushman asking it to be destroyed. Bushman was relieved when Spohr assigned Daddy Baker to direct the actor's next film. In all, Bushman appeared in more than 100 Essanay movies between 1911 and 1915, almost always playing the romantic leading man. And he claims he doesn't remember any of them. Now, this guy was trying to distance himself from the company later in life. Although Bushman was already married and the father of 5 children at the time he appeared in His Friend's Wife, Essanay's public relations department kept this information under wraps for years, fearing that it would hurt the star's image. And I can kind of understand that. You have a movie star that all of these girls are fawning over. You don't want to give the impression that they're not single, I guess. And at this time, it's like, it's a money-making strategy, so keeping under wraps that you're married and have 5 kids would be beneficial to any of these movie stars because they have so much exposure and they're being seen by so many people. It kind of makes sense to me, but it is a weird practice looking at it today. But if you look at some of other stuff today, like take pro wrestling for example, they don't say on screen who they're actually married to, and they use different names on screen. And so it's the same thing here in this era. In the 1910s, you have actors that are most likely using stage names, like this other dude. He's calling himself Daddy here. Daddy Baker. So you have just an obligation to try to make this business money. And some people have different thresholds or different morals that they're willing to break. I don't know. But it's not something that I would consider today. Because it doesn't matter at this point. With as much widespread distribution that we can have in the digital era, it's a lot different. Alright, continuing on. Although Bushman was already married and the father of 5 children at the time he appeared in His Friend's Wife, Essanay's public relations department kept this information under wraps for years, fearing that it would hurt the star's image. As Luella Parsons wrote in her 1944 memoir, The Gay Illiterate, quote, Spohr nearly went out of his mind, keeping the fact from the palpitating fans that his Adonis had begat 5 offspring. And it was a hush-hush job that required a bit of doing, believe me. End quote. Spohr's ploy worked, perhaps too well. Bushman received thousands of marriage proposals from adoring female fans. See, that's exactly what I was assuming. The star's fan mail became so voluminous that Essanay eventually hired 3 secretaries to forge flirtatious responses. Man, this was a grift that just kept on going. According to legend, one young woman was so determined to marry Bushman that she showed up at the Argyle Street studio in a wedding dress. So, the only other time I could think of this happening in pop culture would be Elvis and then the Beatles. Like, the earliest that comes to mind. But we have Bushman here that came before both of them, having girls throw themselves at him. At the dawn of the film industry's star system, Francis X. Bushman became the silver screen's first true matinee idol. He also played the off-screen role of, quote, movie star, unquote, to the hilt, driving around Chicago's North Side at night in a purple limousine with a special light on the dashboard that made it easier for him to be seen. Yeah, I doubt anybody wants to be seen like that tonight. Like these days at night in Chicago. Man, how times are different. Even he had his name embossed in gold lettering on the car's exterior. The press dubbed him, quote, King of the Movies, unquote. Bushman would eventually find himself at the center of a nationwide scandal when his extramarital affair with his frequent Essanay co-star and future wife, Beverly Bain, became public in 1918. Bain, famed for her big saucer-like brown eyes, received her big break at the age of 16 when she responded to an Essanay casting call seeking extras who could show up wearing, quote, white gloves and pretty clothing, unquote, for ballroom scenes. After dropping off her photo at the Argyle Street studio, Bain waited a week and then received a call from Henry McRae Webster's secretary asking her to report for work the next morning. Because she was still in high school at the time, Bain's mother let her return to the studio only under the supervision of her aunt. Quote, the next morning we were at the studio, end quote, Bain recalled. Quote, and Mr. Webster came bustling in and he said, here's a script. You read the part of Marion. Go out and have your lunch and come back and I'll take you through a scene. Oh, how my heart was palpitating, end quote. While reading through the script, Bain was astonished to find that Marion was the lead role in the picture. After walking through a scene with her one time, Webster seemed satisfied. Quote, now little lady, end quote, he asked her. Quote, what do you think an actress should be paid? You have to be in the studio every morning at 9. You'll work until late in the afternoon, and we work from 9 until 1 on Saturdays. We never work on Sundays, unquote. Bain timidly negotiated a starting salary of $25 per week for her first 4 weeks at the studio, during which time she was under Webster's personal direction. Then she went into the, quote, regular stock, unquote, and began working with other directors. 6 months later, her salary jumped to $75 a week, and then $350 a week. Eventually, she would star in more than 400 Essanay productions and become known as the Queen of the Movies. So I was going to save the photos for the end, but I'll give you a short glimpse here. We'll look at them at the end. But that's Beverly there. Beverly Bain. Started at $25 a week and got up to $350 a week. What a powerhouse. And that's in the 1910s, mind you. In 1912, Essanay's increased output of Western films led Spohr and Anderson to establish a second base in Niles, California. I kid you not, this town is called Niles, California. Niles. And I'm here in Niles, Illinois, which is on the border of Chicago. Niles, California is a small town 40 miles south of San Francisco. After that, Niles was naturally where Bronco Billy spent most of his time living and working, as he continued to churn out westerns while Spohr and Henry McRae Webster oversaw the productions of, quote, parlor comedies, unquote, and dramatic movies back in Chicago. The most important surviving Chicago shot Essanay film of this time, and arguably the masterpiece of all of its extant movies, is From the Submerged, a drama released in November 1912 that was written and directed by Theodore Wharton and starred the beautiful Ruth Stonehouse. Theodore Wharton had begun his career as a director for Pathé Frères in 1910 and had the reputation of being something of an innovator. He was one of the new directors that Essanay had hired following the exodus of their talent to the American Film Manufacturing Company. Wharton's 1912 Essanay production of Sunshine, now lost, made a big impression on critics for its creative use of superimpositions. One scene featured a character making a confession to a priest, while the story of his confession appeared as an image within the same frame as the shot of the man telling the story. A similarly visually flamboyant device also serves as the emotional climax to From the Submerged, a movie that more than lives up to its evocative and poetic title. From the Submerged tells the story of a young homeless man, Charlie, played by E.H. Calvert, who is prevented from committing suicide in a public park by a complete stranger, a young woman, Stonehouse, who reminds him by pointing to the heavens that God still loves him. In a melodramatic plot twist, Charlie soon inherits a fortune and, flash forwarding to 2 years later, becomes engaged to a wealthy socialite. With several of their affluent friends, the couple attends a slumming party where they visit a breadline that offers handouts to the homeless. Feeling guilty, Charlie confesses his destitute past to his fiancée, who laughs and says, quote, "How funny," end quote. The only line of dialogue in the film represented by a title card. Realizing her shallowness, Charlie decides to break off the engagement. Remembering the woman who saved his life, he then dons his former shabby attire and returns to the public park where he had almost killed himself 2 years earlier. There, Charlie encounters the same woman from the beginning of the film, and reminds her of their previous encounter. After a quickie wedding, he takes her to his lavish home where she realizes for the first time that her husband is actually a wealthy man. Although the plot of From the Submerged is similar to that of the contrived Victorian-style melodramas common to the era, a lot of narrative twists and turns are crammed into a running time of less than 10 minutes. The film is nevertheless sensitively directed and extremely well acted. It also offers more psychological and emotional complexity than what one typically finds in a movie from 1912. One impressive scene, for instance, has Charlie ripping up a photograph of his fiancée, a way to indicate the end of their engagement through purely visual means. Although this may be, in and of itself, a familiar film image, what really impresses about the moment is the way that Calvert slowly and sadly shakes his head while tearing up the picture. A subtle and exquisite piece of movie acting. It is immediately followed by an even more impressive moment. Charlie slowly starts to nod as he remembers his encounter with the young woman in the park, a flashback shot of which is superimposed above his head. À la sunshine, to illustrate his thought process. The film's social criticism, the ironic juxtaposition of wealthy and poor characters, the breadline scenes, the musical editing rhythms, and the use of an internally rhyming structure, such as bookending the film with scenes in the same park, all show the obvious influence of W.D. Griffith's groundbreaking A Corner in Wheat from 1909. In turn, the opening scene from The Submerged I keep on wanting to say from the Submerged. In turn, the opening scene of From the Submerged may have influenced the Estonian-born French director Dmitry Kirsanov, whose avant-garde masterpiece Ménilmontant from 1926 features a nearly identical sequence in which a character is prevented from committing suicide by a stranger in a public park. Perhaps the best way to gauge the film's effectiveness is to compare it to Tempted by Necessity, a Selig Polyscope movie from the same year that also attempts to address social issues such as crime and unemployment. Selig's film, directed by the one Lem B. Parker, is earnest and dull and possesses none of the visual inventiveness from the other short film From the Submerged. The following year, 1913, was when Essanay began to decisively shift the bulk of its motion picture production from Chicago towards its new property in Niles, California. The Selig Polyscope Company had been the first studio to establish a permanent base in Southern California. And in the Edendale district of Los Angeles in 1909, and many other established studios and independents soon tried their luck out west. It was easier there for the independents to get away with using equipment for which they did not possess the necessary Edison licenses, and perhaps more important, the climate and geography were considered more ideal than Chicago for film production. So they ran away to get away from Edison's patents and to use his patented projectors, film cameras, probably lights as well. If he was patenting lights, he probably was trying to charge people and exclusively buy the lights from him, because we already talked about the studio cameras that he was, and the projectors to show the films. He wanted complete control over all that. But there was something else involved with that too that we haven't touched upon yet. The warm and sunny weather was conducive to year-round shooting. Unlike in Chicago, where the brutal winters made exterior shooting difficult for a significant portion of the year, and the geographical terrain was diverse enough to easily accommodate the use of different kinds of exterior locations. In Southern California, mountains, the ocean, desert, forests, and urban areas were all within close proximity to each other. Because westerns were Essanay's specialty, and because Bronco Billy Anderson had substantial experience shooting out west, it was only a matter of time before the studio would establish its own permanent facilities in California. The base Essanay had established in Niles in 1912, which included using a railroad car as a laboratory and a barn as a makeshift studio stage, had been only temporary. In July 1913, Spohr and Anderson invested $50,000 in a Niles studio that included indoor and outdoor stages, dressing rooms, a carpentry shop, a props room, and a wardrobe room. Additionally, 10 cottages at a far end of the property were used as housing for the talent during production. Meanwhile, Essanay production in Chicago continued throughout 1913 and 1914. New performers, including future stars Gloria Swanson and Wallace Beery, signed contracts and made their first films at the Chicago studio. Improbably, the hulking Beery began his career at Essanay playing a character named, quote, Sweetie, Sweedie, a female Swedish maid, in a series of cross-dressing comedies. There we go. Some of the first... And you know... Bronco Billy Anderson, Selig, you know these names. Bronco Billy Anderson has Jewish origin. And we have the Hollywood system that does the rituals of having men cross-dress. So you wonder if this was nefarious way back then as well. Overall, though, production in Chicago was on the wane as production in Niles, California increased. In 1914, however, Essanay scored a major coup by luring young Charlie Chaplin, already the top comedian in motion pictures, away from his employers at Keystone Studios, which we see right here on the screen right now. Chaplin's Essanay contract included, in addition to a lucrative salary, the alluring prospect of having his own production unit and thus achieving greater artistic freedom. The plan was for Chaplin to report to work at Essanay's Chicago studio at the beginning of the 1915 season, where he would start work on a series of comedy shorts over which he would have complete creative control. A series of Chaplin comedy smashes would have conceivably established both Essanay's Niles and Chicago plants as film production powerhouses. Things did not go according to plan. And that is the end of chapter 8. We do have photographs from this chapter, so we will begin looking at those right now. So I'll make this big for all of us to look at. Thank you again for being here today, everyone. So on page 90 of chapter 8, we have the exterior of the original Essanay Studios building entrance, erected in 1908, 1 year after the company's formation. And this building is still there, which we looked at it a few weeks ago on the other shows. But that was the front facade, and I do not believe the facade is the same. I don't know if it's in a museum somewhere, but we have it existing here in photographs at least. Next here is 3 stills from Mr. Flip from 1909, directed by Gilbert Anderson, aka Bronco Billy. And this is just to accentuate the close-up, which is right here, which was described earlier in the chapter of the woman sticking scissors in a wicker chair. So that was revolutionary for the time. And then there's an undated publicity photo of Francis X. Bushman, courtesy of the Chicago History Museum. So this guy was the heartthrob of the movie business at the time. And he was a former bodybuilder as well, which I think is kind of cool. But he didn't like the bossiness of the film directors, unfortunately. And next we have Beverly Bain in a still from an unidentified film. This is also from courtesy of the Chicago the Chicago History Museum. And that is the woman that had a contract at 16 years old, and her aunt was accompanying her to the studio. Started making $25 a week. Eventually was making $350 per week. Next we have 3 stills from the film From the Submerged, the one of the guy getting talked out of committing suicide. This is from 1912. It's directed by Theodore Wharton. So that's a shot in the park. Yet again, another shot in the park. And I assume that's near the ending of the film, when he takes her home. So that's it from the book for today. I do have the 1909 Essanay film, The Haunted Lounge, and we are going to watch that right now, even with this music playing underneath. And I hope this was a little better format today to keep things interesting. Instead of no music, we have a little bit of music playing. So I had to put my logo as a watermark, but this is the entirety of the short. You could find it on YouTube. It's where I found it. And yeah, it's really not, it's not an issue. I got it from the film, it's called Films by the Year. That's the name of the YouTube channel. But director is Gilbert M. Anderson. The star is Ben Turpin. This was shot in Chicago. So this is on a Chicago street. The north side. And the surrounding neighborhoods too. So I don't know what street this is exactly. And you know, another sad thing is, like we read today, there's not many of these films left. Considering they made 72 films in their first year open, and most of them are gone. Like, it's a shame. But at least we have this. And it gives us a good idea of how film production was running back then. So we have like the wide sets still. We have the exterior shots. A lot of the wide sets I really think came from the vaudeville days, theater, stage plays. Yeah, it's pretty funny. I'm going to let this play all the way through. It's only 5 minutes long. But this is a little longer than some of the other initial short films that came out. Like we were saying, with Edison, there were 2-minute films generally, or less. It was all hand cranked. But by this point, they were making the projectors, which a lot of the films got destroyed just being played through the projectors. And even today's 35mm prints can run about 300 playthroughs before it starts being just unplayable. Because you have all the film stock on the sides, the perforations, that starts breaking off. You also get random tears. If the projector ends up jamming, it could just rip the film in half. You could have a real nightmare scenario where the rip goes into halfway through the film. So it can go from the side, like off to the side, and then start ripping down the middle. And that could go for a while without realizing it, especially if that's happening at the other end of, like, after the film is projected and it's going back on the take-up reel. If there's a problem on the take-up reel and it splits the film in half like that, if you're not standing there watching it or aware of it, then that's a nightmare situation. But it's good we have this. And again, you could find this on YouTube. I wanted to show it here so that, like, it enhances this deep dive that we're doing. But you could find it on the YouTube channel films by the year. But this is so long out of copyright, it's like not even funny. So and see, they were getting creative with doing different stop motion here, and it's getting towards the end of it now. I can see with the sides. You get the little scribbles on the side, and then you see that's the end of the stock. Okay, everyone. So that was it for today. I hope you all enjoyed it. Please like and subscribe. If you are subscribed, please hit the bell notification icon so that you have all the updates whenever I go live. Right now I'm going live 4 days a week. Wednesday, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. Or why did I say Wednesday? Sunday, Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday. I'll eventually be doing Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays as well. But I need to work that into my schedule. So along with that, I'm finalizing a few of the new intros for other deep dives I'm considering doing. But yeah, that's it for today. And if you can catch me tomorrow, I'll be doing a general talk about all of these deep dives that I'm doing, and also the other projects and different interviews that I'm lining up with some new guests as well as some old. And other than that, we will continue next week on Saturday with Chapter 9. And that will be the Golden Age of Selig Polyscope. So we'll get into his film studio. So until next time, class dismissed.